They stole my family's 87-acre farm for a dog park, then discovered I owned every road leading to it. Let me set the scene. I'm watching bulldozers demolish my grandfather's barn, the one he built with his own hands in 1947. City Council President Diane Pressler leans against her Mercedes, sipping a latte, soaking in her victory. She offered me $425,000 for land worth $890,000, called me provincial when I objected, rammed through eminent domain in 3 weeks flat. What Diane doesn't know, while she was busy congratulating herself, I quietly bought the 3 properties surrounding her precious dog park. Every single access road, every entrance, every exit. Her $2.3 million project is now landlocked. What would you do if corrupt officials seized your family's legacy? Drop your state below. I'm tracking where this happens most. If you've ever been steamrolled by someone drunk on petty power, stick around. This gets better. Where are you watching from? My name is Reed Garrett. 58 years old, 3rd-generation farmer, running this place solo for 6 years since my wife Margot lost her fight with cancer. The Garrett Farm, 87 acres in Millerton County, deep in America's Rust Belt, has been operational since 1947. My grandfather Hank bought it fresh off the boat from Europe after World War II, paid $3,200 cash from his Army savings, cleared the timber himself, built that barn with hand-milled lumber and pure stubbornness, planted the first crops with a mule named Sargent. My father Thomas expanded in the 70s, organic rotation before organic was cool. He taught me soil isn't dirt, it's living history. Then Margot. My wife could coax life from stone. Her farm stand became legendary. People drove 40 miles for her tomato preserves. The smell of turned earth mixed with diesel from the old John Deere. Those mornings tasted like coffee and optimism. After she passed, I kept going. Leased 40 acres to an organic co-op. Employed 8 seasonal workers, good people with families depending on those paychecks. Property assessed at $890,000. Emotional value? Incalculable. Then Diane Pressler arrived. Diane's 52. Moved here 8 years ago from some coastal elite bubble. Former real estate attorney. Married to a tech executive. Current city council president. 0 real ties to Millerton except her country club membership. Known for modernization initiatives, which means bulldozing outdated agricultural eyesores for luxury developments. Gentrification wearing a progressive mask. First encounter was a town meeting 6 months before the bulldozers. Diane wore a suit worth more than my monthly income. Her perfume, expensive, floral, chemical, invaded the room before she did. You could taste it, that cloying sweetness mixing with the stale coffee everyone else was drinking. She pitched the Millerton Green Spaces Initiative. 3 targets: my farm, an old lumber yard, an abandoned drive-in. I raised my hand, politely explained the farm was active, profitable, employed people, fed the community. Asked about alternative locations. Diane looked at me like I'd dragged manure across white carpet. Sentimentality doesn't pay tax revenue, Mr. Garrett, ice in her voice. Progress demands sacrifice from simple folk like yourself. Simple folk. Like we're museum exhibits. 3 weeks later, certified letter. Eminent domain notice. City claiming my farm for Pressler Memorial Dog Park and Community Recreation Zone, named after her late father, naturally. Compensation offer? $425,000. Less than half assessed value. For 87 acres and 3 generations of blood. Legal justification was copy-paste bureaucracy. Public good supersedes private interest. They included an environmental study, commissioned by Diane's college roommate, finished in 3 days, cost $120,000. Normal timeline, 6 weeks. Normal cost, $30,000. The documents literally smelled like fresh toner and lies. I hired Luther Briggs, sharpest attorney in the county. He investigated and came back grim-faced. Reed, it's rigged. Every approval fast-tracked. Public comment period cut from 30 days to 9. This decision was made before you ever got that letter. Here's the part that really burned. Construction contract for the dog park? $2.3 million. Awarded to Pressler Development, LLC, owned by Diane's husband. Self-dealing hidden in plain sight. The objection hearing was theater. Packed chambers. Diane's supporters filled the front rows like a paid audience. I presented economic impact data, environmental benefits, Historical significance, testimonials from workers, none of it mattered. Diane sat at the council table wearing that cold smile, a predator that had already made the kill. The gavel cracked down, that sound, sharp, final, like bone snapping. She leaned into her microphone, voice syrup sweet for the cameras. Majority rules, Mr. Garrett. You have 90 days to vacate. 90 days to abandon everything my family built so she could put her name on a monument to corruption. I'm not the kind of man who rolls over. Never have been. The day after that hearing, I drove to the county assessor's office and spent 8 hours in a basement that smelled like mildew and forgotten paperwork, pulling every property record within 3 miles of my farm. That's when I found it. The thing Diane's expensive attorneys somehow missed. My farm borders County Road 47B on the east side only. 30-foot wide strip of cracked asphalt with a 12-ton weight restriction. Fine for pickup trucks and my tractor. Completely useless for construction vehicles or the daily traffic a dog park generates. The other 3 sides, all private land. Access routes crossed neighboring properties through old easements, legal agreements granting right-of-way, established back in the 50s and 70s when everyone knew everyone and handshakes meant something. Here's where it got interesting. I remembered my father dealing with easement renewals back in '98, complaining about the paperwork. Nothing's permanent unless you make it permanent, Reed, he'd told me. These things expire like milk if you don't watch them. Turned out he was right. Easements aren't forever unless specifically written that way. Most renew every 25 years and require written consent from current landowners. Without that consent, they're just expired promises on yellowed paper. I mapped every route with surveyor precision. North access crossed through Veldman orchards, 3 acres of overgrown apple trees. West access cut through the old Kowalski homestead, 5 acres abandoned 15 years, slowly returning to wilderness. South access ran via Peterson Ranch Service Road, 12 acres of scrubland Dale Peterson used for nothing except complaining about property taxes. All 3 properties had changed hands since those original easements were signed. None of the current owners had updated the agreements, which meant legally those easements had expired. If the city took my farm and converted it to a dog park without securing new easements, their $2.3 million project would be landlocked except for one narrow county road that couldn't handle the load. I sat in my truck outside the assessor's office, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at property maps spread across my steering wheel. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The kind of smile a chess player gets when they see checkmate 6 moves out. Meanwhile, Diane wasn't waiting. 5 days after the hearing, her enforcement team showed up. 3 guys in city vests with a survey crew in tow. They started hammering neon orange stakes along my property line like they were planting flags on conquered territory. The crew chief was Diane's nephew, kid named Tyler. Cocky, early 30s, walked around my land like he owned it already. Just doing preliminary work, he said when I confronted him, voice dripping with the same condescension his aunt carried. Getting ready for transition of ownership. Transition, like my family's legacy was a corporate merger. I watched them work, jaw clenched, tasting copper penny anger in the back of my throat. Then I noticed water pooling in the north field, my irrigation system, the one I'd just repaired 2 weeks prior for $1,200. Water was flooding where it shouldn't, drowning a 1/4 acre of early tomatoes. "Hey!" I shouted at Tyler. "You broke my irrigation line." He glanced over, shrugged like he was swatting a fly. "Must have been like that. Old equipment fails." $8,000 in crop loss, just like that, gone. I filed a complaint with the city manager, Diane's hand-picked appointee, and got a runaround that would make a politician proud. Then Diane launched her media offensive. The Millerton Gazette ran a front-page story. Dog park delayed by stubborn farmer. The reporter was Diane's tennis partner. Objectivity didn't even bother showing up. The community Facebook group exploded, half supporting me, half believing Diane's spin about a selfish old man blocking children and puppies. Anonymous letters hit the opinion section claiming I was a tax cheat, that I'd pocketed funds I'd never received, that I exploited workers I paid above minimum wage. Lies printed in newspaper ink stick harder than truth spoken quietly. I spent the next week driving to 3 properties, knocking on doors. Trish Veldman owned the orchards, 67 years old, retiring to Florida in 4 months, asking $95,000 for land maybe worth $60,000. The Kowalski homestead sat abandoned, owner deceased, county holding a $22,000 tax lien nobody wanted to pay. Dale Peterson's service road, Dale was 71, Diane's poker buddy, wanting $180,000 for 12 acres of scrub brush. Total cost to control every access point, $297,000. My available assets after Margot's life insurance and farm savings, $340,000. Luther's warning echoed, "You'll bankrupt yourself on a gamble." I sat across from Trish Veldman at her kitchen table, coffee mugs between us, afternoon light slanting through dusty windows. "I'll take it," I said. $95,000, cash, 3 weeks. We shook hands, calluses against calluses, first domino falling. The Veldman property closed in 3 weeks exactly. I used a shell LLC called Millerton Agricultural Holdings to keep my name off the paperwork, something I'd learned watching Diane's husband hide his construction contracts behind corporate veils. What's good for the goose, right? Trish got her asking price, I got 3 acres in the North Access Road, and Diane had no idea the land had changed hands. The county recorder's office doesn't exactly send out press releases, and I was counting on Diane's arrogance to keep her from checking. Next was the Kowalski homestead, and this required a different approach. The property had a $22,000 tax lien, money owed to the county that had been piling up interest for years. The owner was dead, estate stuck in probate, no heirs stepping forward to claim it. I remembered reading about tax lien investments in some financial magazine Margot used to leave in the bathroom, articles I'd skimmed while brushing my teeth, never thinking I'd actually use the information. Turned out counties love selling tax liens. They get their money immediately, and the buyer gets the property if nobody pays up within the redemption period. I paid the $22,000 to the county, then filed what's called a quiet title action, basically a legal process to establish ownership when the deed's unclear. No heirs contested it. Why would they? They'd ignored the property for 15 years. 45 days later, the deed transferred to my second LLC. The key thing I learned: counties want their tax money more than they want to babysit abandoned property, and patience beats deep pockets when you know how the system works. That left the Peterson problem. Dale wouldn't sell to me directly. He and Diane played poker every Thursday, and loyalty runs deep when you're betting on the same hands. But Dale didn't know my daughter Cassidy, and he definitely didn't know she worked in corporate finance in Chicago. She flew home for a weekend, created a third LLC on her laptop in about 40 minutes, then knocked on Dale's door wearing a business suit and her most professional smile. Told him she was an investor scouting vacation property development opportunities, asked about the service road parcel like it was just one item on a long list. Dale saw a pretty young professional with money and dropped his price to $165,000. Probably figured he was charming her into overpaying for scrubland. Cassidy signed the papers, shook his hand, and flew back to Chicago. Dale never knew he'd just sold the key to Diane's kingdom to a Garrett. I signed that final deed sitting in my truck at dusk, fingers cramping around the pen, tasting that copper penny nervousness you get before a gamble either pays off or ruins you. Total spent, $282,000. Remaining liquid assets, $58,000. Timeline, 11 weeks since the eminent domain notice dropped, 7 days until they could legally seize the farm. Everything was in place, every access point locked down. 3 properties, 3 LLCs, 0 connection to my name in public records. Diane's dog park would be landlocked, and she wouldn't know until it was too late. While I was quietly buying up the county, Diane was making noise. Bulldozers arrived at my farm's perimeter. Couldn't enter legally yet, but the message was clear. Big yellow machines idling just beyond the property line, diesel fumes drifting across my fields like threats written in smoke. She held a press conference announcing the groundbreaking ceremony scheduled 10 days out, guest list reading like a who's who of state politics, state senator, newspaper editors, local influencers, everyone who mattered. Diane's quote made the evening news. This dog park represents Millerton's transformation from backward farming town to progressive community hub. Backward. That word again, like we were some embarrassing stain she needed to bleach away. She even visited me personally 3 days before the bulldozers were set to roll. Pulled up in that black Mercedes, walked across my gravel drive in heels that had no business on a farm, offered an extra $50,000 as a goodwill payment if I'd vacate early, make her timeline easier. I was standing by the barn, what was left of it, wiping grease off my hands with a red shop rag. "I'll be out on time, Diane," I said, voice flat as Kansas. "You enjoy that dog park." She studied my face for a long moment, looking for cracks, for weakness, for surrender. Found nothing but tired resignation, or so she thought. She smiled, that cold, victorious smile, and drove away trailing dust and expensive perfume. What Diane didn't know was that same morning, I'd filed formal letters with the city's legal department. As owner of the Veldman, Kowalski, and Peterson properties, I was formally denying all easement renewals. Cited property rights, insurance liability concerns, environmental impact on groundwater. Legal language wrapped around a simple message: no access granted. The city attorney, a competent guy named Morris who wasn't on Diane's payroll, reviewed my filings that afternoon. I imagine his face when he realized the problem. County Road 47B with its 12-ton weight limit couldn't support construction equipment or daily dog park traffic. No easements meant no alternative access. No access meant no parking lot, no pavilions, no infrastructure. Legally, Diane's $2.3 million dog park would be accessible only by foot or bicycle via a narrow county road that led nowhere useful. Morris sent a memo to Diane: "We have a significant access problem." Her response, overheard by a clerk who'd grown tired of her tantrums: "I don't care. Figure it out or you're fired." Diane called an emergency city council session with exactly 72-hour notice, the legal minimum, timed perfectly so most residents wouldn't hear about it until after it happened. I showed up anyway with Luther, walked into those council chambers smelling like the farm because I'd come straight from fixing fence posts, boots still carrying mud that tracked across their polished floors. Diane sat at the head table looking like she'd just won the lottery, proposal already printed and distributed. Emergency eminent domain for the access properties. She was actually trying to take the land twice, use the same hammer on different nails. Luther stood up, argued it was illegal double-taking, cited 3 case precedents off the top of his head. Councilmember Rick Paulson, Diane's golf buddy, argued public necessity supersedes procedural concerns, which is fancy talk for "we're doing it anyway." They scheduled a vote for the next meeting, 2 weeks out, which gave Diane time to pressure the fence sitters. Meanwhile, she escalated everywhere else. Code enforcement showed up at my rental cottage, the little place I'd been renting to a young teacher named Beth, and found 8 violations, every single one petty as hell. Fence 2 inches over height limit, mailbox positioned 6 inches outside regulation zone, gutter downspout draining toward the property line instead of away, fines totaling $3,400. Next came an anonymous tip to the EPA about pesticide runoff, which was pure fiction since I'd been farming organic for 12 years, hadn't touched chemicals since Margot convinced me to go natural. EPA inspector spent 4 hours testing soil samples, found nothing, but the damage was done. Rumors spread faster than actual facts. Then Diane's husband's firm offered to buy my 3 LLCs for $150,000 total, half what I'd paid, an insult wrapped in a threat. The message was clear: surrender now, or we'll destroy you slowly. The pressure campaign hit the media hard. Newspaper ran photos of sad kids holding dog leashes with the caption, "Children's dreams delayed by landowner dispute." Those photos tasted like bile going down, pure manipulation, exploiting kids for sympathy points. The local TV station did a segment about how one farmer's greed blocks community recreation space, never mentioning the self-dealing, the lowball offer, the corruption baked into every layer. Comment sections filled with people calling me selfish, greedy, stuck in the past. Half the town thought I was the villain in a story Diane had written herself. I realized I needed public support, needed people to see past Diane's spin. Started approaching local businesses, the ones she'd already crushed under her progressive bulldozer. Frank's Hardware had been forced to relocate for a boutique hotel project, lost half his customer base in the move. Maria's Millerton Diner lost its parking to a pedestrian plaza that nobody used, revenue down 40%. 3 generational farms had been pressured to sell for housing developments that never quite materialized, land sitting empty, families displaced for nothing. We formed the Millerton Property Rights Alliance, started our own social media campaign, posted photos of the Garrett Farm's history, economic impact data, interviews with my seasonal workers, many of them Latino families now facing job loss because Diane wanted her name on a monument. The counter-narrative started building, slow but steady, truth pushing back against her well-funded lies. I also did something that made Diane furious in a way I could see from across town. Erected 8-foot chain-link fencing around all 3 properties I'd acquired, surrounded her future dog park with agricultural barriers. Legally justified it as livestock containment, even though I had no livestock there, because agricultural exemptions trump residential zoning in our county. Something else I'd learned from my father: farmers have rights, city dwellers don't. Old laws written when America actually valued people who grew food. The fences were legal, ugly, and blocked visual access to the dog park site. Diane couldn't touch them, but they humiliated her. Her precious project was now surrounded by chain link like a prison yard. 3 days before the council vote, I got an unexpected visitor. Tyler, the survey crew chief, Diane's nephew, showed up at my door around sunset looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His wife was pregnant, he told me, first kid, and guilt was eating him alive. He'd been the one who broke my irrigation system, following Diane's direct orders to send a message. He had text messages, timestamps, voice recordings of Diane instructing him to cause damage. "I can't bring a kid into the world carrying this," he said, hands shaking as he gave me a written statement. "She's family, but what she's doing is wrong." I took the statement, thanked him, told Luther to lock it in his safe. We had evidence of criminal mischief and abuse of power, Diane's own nephew willing to testify. But Luther advised patience. Premature exposure lets her cover tracks. We deploy this at the perfect moment. I agreed. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know you're holding, the ace you keep hidden until the final hand when the pot's too big to walk away from. My daughter Cassidy came home that weekend with her laptop and a determination I recognized from her mother. She worked in corporate finance, the kind of job where you dig through numbers looking for patterns, anomalies, the things that don't add up. "Dad," she said, settling at the kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, "let me look at the public records. If Diane's dirty, the money will tell us where." She started pulling municipal bond documents, LLC registrations, contract awards, anything filed with the county or state that carried a public records stamp. I watched her work, fingers flying across keys, eyes scanning spreadsheets with the intensity of someone hunting buried treasure. 3 hours in, she stopped, sat back, said one word, "Gotcha." The dog park construction contract, $2.3 million to Pressler Development LLC, was owned 60% by Diane's husband, 40% by Diane herself through a trust structure designed to obscure her involvement. Self-dealing at its finest, the kind of conflict of interest that violates every ethics law on the books. But Cassidy found more. The project was funded by municipal bonds, $3.1 million issued to taxpayers who'd be paying it back for 20 years. Only $2.3 million was allocated for actual construction. The remaining $800,000 was labeled administrative costs, vague enough to hide anything. Cassidy traced those funds like a bloodhound following scent. She found $425,000 paid to consulting fees for a firm that employed Diane's former law partner, the same woman she'd practiced real estate law with before moving to Millerton. Another $120,000 went to that environmental study, the one Diane's college roommate conducted in 3 days. Normally, that work cost $30,000 and took 6 weeks. This was corruption with a paper trail, every transaction documented because they thought nobody would bother looking. Cassidy explained something I'd never known, sitting there with spreadsheets glowing on her screen. Any taxpayer can request a municipal bond audit. It's public money, which means public oversight. If irregularities show up, bondholders can demand investigation and state authorities have to respond. Most citizens never exercise that right because they don't know it exists, but it's sitting there in the law like a loaded gun nobody picks up. She'd already drafted the audit request, formal language citing specific expenditures that appeared inconsistent with stated purposes. "We file this," she said, "and the Attorney General's office has to look. Election year, corruption case, small town David versus Goliath, they'll love it." I now held 3 weapons Diane didn't know existed. Proof of self-dealing buried in bond documents, evidence of property damage from Tyler's statement, control of every access point through those deeds. Diane remained completely unaware of the first 2, walking around town like she'd already won, attending fundraisers, giving interviews about community progress. My strategy crystallized right there at that kitchen table, coffee cups empty, evening light fading to dark. I didn't just want to block the dog park. I wanted to expose the entire network of corruption she'd built, pull it into daylight where it would rot under public scrutiny. Luther cautioned when I told him the plan. State investigation takes months, maybe a year. You want faster justice than that. I did. I wanted Diane to destroy herself publicly, wanted her standing in front of cameras when the walls collapsed. "Let her proceed to groundbreaking," I said. Maximum exposure, maximum audience. Then we detonate everything simultaneously. Luther smiled, the grim smile of a lawyer who'd just seen a perfect trap. "You're not just defending yourself anymore," he said. "You're going scorched earth." I thought about Margot, about my grandfather's barn in splinters, about Tyler's shaking hands and those sad kids weaponized in newspaper photos. "She made it scorched earth," I replied. "I'm just holding the match." The city council voted 4-3 to attempt eminent domain on my access properties. Diane triumphant, giving a TV interview about how rule of law prevails over one man's selfishness. She set the groundbreaking ceremony date 12 days out, sent invitations to the governor's office and major donors, ordered a custom podium for $40,000 of taxpayer money. I watched the news coverage in silence. Luther asked, "They're going to take your land." I looked at him, completely calm. "Let them try," I said. "I want cameras rolling when they realize they can't." Luther and I spread everything across his conference table like generals planning invasion: documents, timelines, contact lists, leverage points mapped on yellow legal pads. We built a three-pronged attack designed to hit Diane from directions she couldn't defend simultaneously. First prong, federal civil rights lawsuit arguing discriminatory targeting, using Diane's own words about provincial farmers and simple folk as evidence of bias. Luther had recordings from town meetings, transcripts from interviews, a pattern of contempt for agricultural communities that federal judges don't appreciate. We'd seek an injunction blocking the second eminent domain attempt on my access properties, and filing the lawsuit triggered an automatic 30-day delay on any land seizure, bought us time we desperately needed. Luther contacted the ACLU, pitched it as a property rights case with discrimination elements, and they bit hard. Turns out civil liberties organizations love stories about government overreach in election years. Second prong, hit the money. Cassidy compiled everything into an evidence package. Bond documents showing fund misallocation, LLC registrations revealing Diane's hidden ownership, contract awards to her husband's company, that fraudulent environmental study. We filed complaints with the State Ethics Commission and Attorney General's office simultaneously, included anonymous hotline tips about municipal corruption in Millerton, made sure it landed on multiple desks at once so nobody could bury it quietly. The AG's office had elections coming up in 6 months, and prosecutors love high-profile corruption cases right before voters head to polls. Luther predicted they'd open investigation within a week, subpoenas within 2. The timing was perfect. Groundbreaking ceremony would happen right as state investigators started asking questions Diane couldn't answer. Third prong was media exposure, the court of public opinion where Diane had been winning until now. I contacted Marcus Webb, state investigative journalist who'd won awards exposing corruption in 3 counties, guy with a reputation for breaking stories that ended careers. Gave him copies of everything. Documents, Tyler's testimony, financial trails, the whole corrupt machinery laid bare. Offered him an exclusive if he'd publish morning of the groundbreaking ceremony, maximum impact when Diane would be standing in front of cameras expecting celebration. Marcus spent 2 days verifying sources, cross-checking facts, building an airtight story. Called me back. "This is Pulitzer track material, Reed. She's going down hard." Luther warned this made me a target, that Diane would retaliate with everything she had left. "She already has," I said, thinking about my burned barn, my flooded crops, my demolished family legacy. Now it's my turn. Building public support meant mobilizing the Property Rights Alliance, turning our 47 members into a visible force. We planned peaceful protest at the groundbreaking, signs with Garrett family photos spanning 3 generations, messages like "Save local farms," and "Corporate greed wears a progressive mask." I visited each member personally, asked for help without demanding it. Frank from the hardware store provided lumber for signposts, wouldn't take payment, said supporting me was cheaper than therapy for what Diane had done to his business. Maria at the diner arranged food for protesters, tamales and coffee for anyone who showed up cold and early. Jacob, my neighboring farmer, committed his tractor brigade, said if legal protest didn't work, 50 John Deeres blocking access roads certainly would. We built a social media strategy around #MillertonTransparency, shared simplified bond document highlights that regular people could understand, posted video testimonials from seasonal workers facing unemployment because progress apparently required their poverty. The counter-narrative grew stronger daily, truth spreading through networks Diane couldn't control or buy. Then came the hardest part, liquidating everything I had left. My remaining capital sat at $58,000 plus farm equipment valued around $180,000. I sold the John Deere tractor, the one my father taught me to drive when I was 12, engine sound I'd heard every morning for 40 years. Sold the hay baler, irrigation equipment, everything with resale value. Raised $140,000 total, enough to fund the legal war ahead. The silence when they hauled that tractor away was louder than any engine roar I'd ever heard. Empty space where something essential used to be. I sold Margot's farm stand equipment too. Her preservation jars, the antique scale she'd bought at auction, tools she'd touched 10,000 times. Raised $12,000, donated every penny to the local food bank in her name because she would have wanted hungry people fed more than she'd want me hoarding relics. Total war chest, $210,000 for legal fees, expert witnesses, media campaigns, contingencies for whatever desperate moves Diane might make. Luther itemized the budget like a military quartermaster, $80,000 for federal lawsuit, $35,000 for expert witnesses, property appraisers and ethics analysts who'd testify if needed, $15,000 for PR consultant to coordinate messaging, $80,000 reserved for Diane's countermeasures because she'd throw money at problems until something stuck. Cassidy contributed $30,000 from her savings, said Mom would want this fight funded properly. Then my son Derek called, first time in 2 years since we'd fought about him leaving the farm for commercial aviation. He wired $20,000, asked if he could attend the groundbreaking, voice cracking like he was 17 again, asking forgiveness for some teenage mistake. I didn't understand what this place meant until they tried to take it, he said. I told him come home, told him I loved him, felt our family reuniting through shared purpose the way Margot always said we would when it mattered most. That night I stood in the empty equipment barn, everything sold except the land itself, and realized I wasn't fighting for property anymore. I was fighting for the principle that power without accountability is just tyranny wearing a smile. 6 days before groundbreaking, Diane learned about the federal lawsuit. Process server handed her the injunction filing outside a charity luncheon where she'd been posing for photos with the mayor. Luther's paralegal captured video of her face going pale beneath expensive makeup, that moment when confidence cracks and panic floods in. She called an emergency meeting within the hour. City attorney, contractor, council allies crammed into her office like rats in a sinking ship's hold. The city attorney Morris laid it out plainly. If the attorney general investigated those bonds, everyone with fingerprints on the project would be exposed, possibly indicted. Diane's response, according to the administrative assistant who heard through the door, was pure desperation dressed as command. Then we bury the evidence. What followed was a series of increasingly reckless acts from someone watching their empire crumble in real time. Night of day 6, my storage barn caught fire, the one containing farm records, family heirlooms, Margot's wedding dress I'd kept wrapped in plastic for 6 years because I couldn't bear to look at it but couldn't throw it away. I was in the house when I smelled smoke. That acrid chemical smell that's different from wood burning naturally, ran outside to see flames crawling up the east wall. Fire department responded fast, saved the structure, but 40% was damaged, water and smoke destroying what fire hadn't touched. The arson investigator found accelerant patterns, professional pour marks suggesting someone knew exactly what they were doing. My newly installed security camera, something I'd put up 2 weeks earlier on Luther's advice, captured a vehicle arriving at 2 a.m., someone in a hood splashing liquid, the flash of ignition. Vehicle was registered to a shell company that traced back through 3 corporate layers to Diane's husband's business umbrella, the kind of ownership structure designed to hide identity but transparent once you knew where to look. I didn't report it to police yet, just added it to the evidence pile, another card to play when the stakes were highest. Diane's PR firm released opposition research on me 2 days later, the kind of manufactured scandal that sounds plausible until you check facts. Claimed I owed back taxes. I provided proof of payment going back 15 years, every return filed on time, every dollar accounted for. Suggested I'd abused eminent domain compensation funds I hadn't even received yet. Basic math anyone could verify. Implied seasonal workers were underpaid when I had payroll records showing wages above minimum, workers' comp insurance, even holiday bonuses Margot had insisted on back when she ran the farm stand. Local TV ran the story anyway. Corrections buried in fine print, damage done before truth could catch up. The station issued a weak retraction after Luther threatened legal action, But public perception doesn't correct as easily as facts. Lies stick to reputation like tar, and Diane knew it. Then she came to the burned barn herself, showed up in a black SUV while I was salvaging what I could from the wreckage. She stepped out wearing sunglasses despite overcast sky, armor against having to meet my eyes directly. Offered $1.2 million cash for all my properties, 4 times what I'd paid, enough to disappear comfortably. Condition was signing an NDA, leaving the state, never speaking publicly about anything related to Millerton or the dog park or her administration. I was holding a fire-damaged photo album, pictures of 3 generations half melted into unrecognizable shapes, and I caught the scent of her desperation beneath expensive perfume. Actual sweat, fear leaking through her carefully constructed facade. I'd turned on my phone's voice recorder before she arrived, one-party consent state meaning I could legally capture every word. "I've built my reputation on this project," she said, voice tight as piano wire. "I won't let some hillbilly farmer destroy me." I looked at her directly, let silence hang heavy between us. "I'm not destroying you, Diane," I said quietly. "You did that yourself. I'm just making sure everyone sees it." She left spraying gravel, tires spinning like she could outrun consequences. I sent the recording to Luther, to Marcus the journalist, to the AG's office. Now we had proof of bribery attempt, witness intimidation, Diane's own words revealing how little she thought of people like me, how much she valued her image over anything resembling integrity. Luther called it a gift. "She's panicking, making mistakes. Desperate people always do." 3 days before groundbreaking, a city clerk contacted me anonymously. Lifelong Millerton resident named Sharon who'd watched the town deteriorate under Diane's leadership and decided enough was enough. She provided internal emails showing Diane ordering document destruction, communications proving she'd known about access issues 6 weeks prior, but chose to ignore them because addressing problems meant admitting mistakes. Included were messages where Diane pressured Tyler to recant his statement, threatened his job, his future, his family's security if he cooperated with any investigation. I forwarded everything to the AG, to Marcus, to federal court. We now had obstruction of justice, fraud, witness tampering, 7 different charges that could stick, each one enough to end her career and possibly her freedom. Luther smiled that grim lawyer smile and said, "We've got her. 7 ways to Sunday." I thought about Margot's melted wedding dress, about my grandfather's barn in ruins, about every small cruelty Diane had inflicted thinking she was untouchable. "Good," I said. "Let's make sure she knows it." 24 hours before groundbreaking, Marcus Webb's story was locked and loaded. Editors had approved it. Lawyers had vetted every claim. Publication scheduled for 5 a.m. online edition to catch morning news cycles. Diane somehow learned a journalist was running something, probably from a nervous source who owed her favors, and she tried everything to kill it. Called the newspaper publisher, fellow country club member she'd played tennis with for years, demanded the story be spiked for legal reasons she couldn't quite articulate. Publisher refused on First Amendment grounds. Turned out he actually believed in journalism when it mattered. Who knew? Diane threatened lawsuit. Publisher welcomed it. Cited anti-SLAPP laws protecting journalists from frivolous defamation suits designed to silence reporting. She was hemorrhaging control, watching her carefully built narrative fortress develop cracks she couldn't patch fast enough. She tried a different approach, announced she was moving the groundbreaking ceremony to private property, her husband's development on the east side of town, away from my access road complications. Problem was she'd already sent formal invitations to the dog park site. Governor's office had confirmed attendance at that location, and changing venues 24 hours out signaled weakness she couldn't afford politically. Elections were 8 months away, her council seat vulnerable if opposition smelled blood in the water. She was trapped between admitting the access problem publicly or proceeding with a ceremony at a landlocked site, either choice a loss. She chose pride over pragmatism, decided to barrel forward and hope momentum carried her through. That evening, emergency city council session at 8 p.m., Diane proposed emergency road construction, bulldozing temporary access through county land to bypass my properties entirely. County Commissioner Bill Hedges wasn't her ally. Older guy who'd been in local government since before Diane moved to town, and he refused the permit outright. "Environmental review alone takes 30 days, he said, voice flat. "You want me to violate state law for your photo op?" Diane actually threatened his job, said she'd campaign against him, use her fundraising network to bury him in next election. Bill leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, completely unbothered. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm elected, not appointed. Voters know me. They're just learning about you." The room went silent, that particular quiet when everyone realizes the emperor's clothes are transparent. Diane shouted at council members, slammed her hand on the table, voice climbing octaves as control slipped away. Someone recorded it on their phone, video leaked to social media within the hour. Diane, red-faced, shrieking about insubordination and incompetence, looking nothing like the polished politician she pretended to be. Hashtag Diane Disaster trended locally, comments brutal, her carefully crafted image shredding in real time. I spent that final evening at the farm with family, the last night the property would legally be mine before county took ownership at dawn. Derek had flown in from Seattle, Cassidy drove up from Chicago, and we walked the land together as the sun set. 3 of us quiet with memories neither of them had known they'd missed until facing the loss. "What if this doesn't work?" Derek asked, standing where the barn used to be, foundation stones still visible in the grass. "What if she wins anyway?" I looked at my son, this man I'd watched leave angry and return humbled, and realized he'd finally understood what I'd been trying to teach him about legacy and principle. "She already lost," I said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Cassidy reviewed legal documents one final time by kitchen lamplight, triple-checking every citation, every exhibit, every piece of evidence we'd assembled. Luther called around 11, voice crackling through bad cell reception. AG's office opened formal investigation. Subpoenas issued for Diane, her husband, 3 council members, and the environmental study firm. It's happening. I thanked him, hung up, made my decision. Let the groundbreaking proceed. Let Diane face media, protesters, and state authorities simultaneously. Let her stand in front of cameras expecting triumph and receive devastation instead. Midnight. I walked property lines one final time. Boots crunching gravel roads my grandfather had laid by hand 70 years ago, breathing air that tasted like rain coming and soil settling and something ending so something else could begin. Night sounds wrapped around me, crickets in the grass, distant highway hum, an owl calling from the tree line where Margot and I used to watch stars on summer nights before cancer took her and left me here alone. I encountered a deer in the north field where the barn once stood, young doe frozen in moonlight, eyes reflecting silver fear until she recognized I meant no harm and bounded away into darkness. Symbolic somehow, this moment of wild beauty and scorched earth, reminder that life persists even when men burn everything trying to control it. The farm's final night as my legal possession, but I owned the gates, controlled access, held every card that mattered. Morning would bring cameras and confrontation, state investigators and public reckoning, Diane's empire collapsing under weight of its own corruption. I was ready. More than ready. I was eager to watch justice finally arrive. Marcus Webb's story published at 5 a.m., headlines spreading across state news sites within minutes. Millerton Dog Park scandal, self-dealing, corruption, and displaced farmers. Article included every detail we'd compiled, bond fund misallocation with specific dollar amounts, Diane's hidden LLC ownership percentage, environmental study fraud with timeline comparisons, Tyler's testimony about property damage orders, financial trail so clear a child could follow it. Within 2 hours, 40,000 shares picked up by regional networks, morning talk radio discussing it between weather and traffic. Governor's office canceled attendance by 6 a.m., released statement expressing deep concern, calling for immediate investigation. State Senator issued his own press release backing away from Diane like she was radioactive, suddenly remembering prior commitments that prevented attendance. Diane's phone must have been exploding with calls she couldn't answer because the truth was unanswerable, but she arrived at the dog park site at 7:30 a.m. anyway, black Mercedes rolling up to a scene nothing like she'd imagined. 80-plus protesters lined the county road entrance, bundled against October morning cold, holding signs we'd made in Maria's diner the night before. Garrett family photos spanning generations, messages about corrupt power and displaced families, agricultural workers holding pictures of children who'd lose stability when the farm jobs disappeared. Camera crews from 3 stations set up equipment, journalists smelling blood because Marcus's story had given them the scent. County sheriff waited near his cruiser, holding a manila envelope everyone knew contained the AG's subpoena, legal summons Diane couldn't ignore or dismiss. And me, I stood at the locked gate to County Road 47B, holding the deed to property she'd never known I owned, wearing work clothes and boots still muddy from walking land that was mine by right even if not by law anymore. Diane climbed out of her Mercedes in a designer suit probably worth 3 months of her constituents' rent, Mayor and City Attorney Morris flanking her like nervous bodyguards, and her face when she saw the scene was pure shock painted over with desperate composure. She marched toward me, cameras following, steps clicking on pavement, voice projecting that false confidence politicians use when everything's crumbling. "Mr. Garrett, please open the gate. This is a public event." I didn't move, just held up the deed so cameras could see it. "This is a private road, Diane. You need permission to cross. In writing, signed, and notarized." Her smile tightened, teeth showing. "The city has eminent domain. Open it or I'll have you arrested." I almost laughed. Eminent domain on the dog park, sure. Not on my access roads. Check your paperwork. Morris, the city attorney, leaned close, whispered in her ear, and I watched her face drain 2 shades as he confirmed what she should have verified months ago. We'd taken the park but not the paths to reach it, built a castle on an island with no bridges. Diane pivoted to the cameras, tried to control narrative even as it slipped through her fingers like water. "This is exactly the obstruction I've been describing. One selfish man blocking community progress." I interrupted, voice loud enough for every microphone to catch. "Selfish? Let's talk about the $800,000 in missing bond funds, or the construction contract awarded to your husband's company, or the environmental study that cost $120,000 and took 3 days when it should have cost 30 grand and taken 6 weeks. The crowd murmured, cameras tightened on Diane's face, and I saw the moment she realized this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was an execution. "Those are lies," she stammered, voice losing its polish. "Slander. I'll sue for every—" Luther stepped forward from the crowd, handed her a printed copy of Marcus's article like a server delivering legal notice. "It's in this morning's paper, Diane. State's already investigating. Everything documented, sourced, verified." The sheriff approached, boots heavy on gravel, voice professionally neutral. "Ma'am, I have a subpoena requiring your appearance before the Attorney General's office regarding municipal bond irregularities and ethics violations." Diane's face went from pale to gray, hand trembling as she took the envelope. Then the Property Rights Alliance struck. Frank from the hardware store stepped forward with a microphone someone had set up. "She forced my relocation for a boutique hotel, gave my building to her donor for $1. Maria from the diner. "Her pedestrian plaza killed my parking. I'm down 40% revenue, struggling to keep staff employed." Jacob the farmer. "She called us backward, said farming was dying, claimed we had no vision. We're Millerton's backbone, and she tried to snap us for her vanity project." Seasonal workers spoke through a translator, voices shaking with emotion and fear about futures suddenly uncertain. "We're losing jobs, losing homes, so she can build a monument to herself with our suffering as the foundation." Tyler appeared then, flanked by his attorney, and the cameras swung to him like predators finding fresh prey. "Diane Pressler ordered me to sabotage Mr. Garrett's irrigation system," he said, voice steady despite obvious fear. "I have text messages, recordings, documentation. I'm cooperating fully with authorities." Diane lunged toward him, actually lunged, lost all composure, and the sheriff had to physically restrain her, hands on her shoulders as she screamed, "You're all conspiring. This is a witch hunt, a coordinated attack." The mayor stepped away from her, literal physical distance, voice careful and political. "Diane, perhaps you should step down until this matter is resolved." She turned on him, wild-eyed, but there was nothing left to say because the truth was louder than any defense she could manufacture. I addressed the crowd then, cameras and microphones and witnesses all focused on this moment we'd orchestrated. "I didn't fight to save my farm," I said, voice carrying across cold morning air. "I fought because corrupt officials think power means immunity. They're wrong." I revealed the final piece, the move Diane never saw coming. "I'm donating these access properties to the county with conditions. 1. They're maintained as agricultural conservation easements preserved forever. 2. The dog park gets redesigned as a community garden and farmer's market, actually serving people instead of serving ego. 3. Independent audit of all city projects for the past 5 years. 4. Diane's immediate resignation." Silence hung heavy, everyone waiting for the other shoe. "If these conditions are refused, the properties stay private. The dog park stays landlocked. Her corruption becomes a permanent monument visible from space. County Commissioner Bill Hedges stepped forward, voice gruff but certain. "We accept Reed. Pending council vote, but we accept these terms." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers mixing with camera clicks, and Diane collapsed against the podium like someone had cut her strings. Justice tasted like sweet air after a storm, like breathing free for the first time in months. The sheriff escorted her toward his cruiser as cameras flashed, capturing the fall of someone who'd flown too high on borrowed power and discovered gravity still applies. The following week moved fast once momentum shifted. Diane resigned under pressure, facing 8 criminal charges: fraud, self-dealing, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, witness tampering, abuse of power, misappropriation of public funds, and arson conspiracy. Her husband's company lost every municipal contract across 3 counties, firm under federal investigation for bid rigging schemes that apparently extended beyond Millerton. Turned out, our little town was just the visible tip of a much larger corruption iceberg. City Council recalled 2 of Diane's closest allies through special petition, elections scheduled for spring. The environmental study firm lost state accreditation, owner facing professional sanctions and possible criminal charges for falsifying reports. My federal lawsuit was dismissed as moot since the eminent domain got reversed, county returning the farm to me with formal apologies and waived fees, though by then I'd already decided its future wouldn't involve me farming it alone anymore. The Attorney General's investigation expanded like wildfire in dry grass, finding $1.2 million in misappropriated funds across 4 years, projects approved without proper oversight, contracts awarded to friends and family, a web of corruption so blatant it seemed almost lazy. Diane's assets were frozen pending restitution hearings where she'd have to account for every dollar she'd touched. Tyler received immunity for his cooperation, used the experience to start a construction safety nonprofit focused on protecting workers from pressure to cut corners or commit fraud, turned his guilt into purpose, which Margot always said was the best kind of redemption. Media coverage went national. Farmer topples corrupt city government playing on cable news between political scandals and celebrity gossip. I got interview requests from major outlets, producers wanting to option the story for documentaries or limited series. I declined most of them, told one persistent reporter, "I'm not the story. Accountability is the story. Shine your lights there." I established the Margot Garrett Memorial Agricultural Trust with the farm property, legally protected it from future development or seizure, dedicated it to purposes she would have loved. The trust's mission covered 3 things: preserve all 87 acres for organic farming education, provide scholarships for rural students studying agriculture or environmental science, and host an annual farmers market with free vendor booths for local growers trying to build businesses without capital. First scholarship went to the daughter of one of my seasonal workers, $25,000 toward her agronomy degree. Smart kid who'd been picking crops summers since she was 14 and dreamed of teaching sustainable practices in communities like ours. The dog park concept got reimagined as Millerton Community Gardens and Green Market, 40 raised beds for residents allocated by lottery, farmers market pavilion operating Saturdays year-round. Small dog area as compromise because some people genuinely just wanted space for their pets, and an education center teaching sustainable practices to anyone interested. Funded by restitution money recovered from Diane's fraud, county budget reallocation, and community donations that poured in once people understood the vision. Grand opening happened 6 months later, 2,000 people attending, families spreading blankets on grass, kids running between garden beds, dogs playing in their designated area, vendors selling produce and honey and fresh bread under the pavilion Margot would have adored. I gave a short speech, kept it simple because grand words weren't necessary. My grandfather built a farm. My father sustained it. My wife enriched it. Now it serves everyone. The smell of fresh mulch mixed with children's laughter, tomato plants standing in neat rows, spring air tasting like possibility, and hope and second chances earned through fighting when surrender seemed easier. Margot would have loved this. The community, the growth, the life persisting where someone tried to pave it over. I reconciled fully with both my children, relationships rebuilt through shared purpose and rediscovered respect. Derek visits monthly now, considering a career change, maybe farming after all these years running from it. Cassidy joined the trust board, applies her finance skills to sustainability projects and grant applications. found meaning in protecting what matters instead of just maximizing quarterly returns. I semi-retired from daily farming, teach classes at the education center, mentor young growers trying to start farms in an economy hostile to small agriculture. Final scene in this story isn't dramatic. It's me at Margot's grave on a quiet Tuesday, planting heirloom tomatoes around her headstone, same variety she grew for 40 years. "We did it, Marg," I said to stone and memory and wind. "The land lives on." And I felt her there somehow, in the soil warming under spring sun, in the seeds that would grow and feed people and make more seeds, in the permanence we'd built from impermanent lives. They thought they could pave over history. Instead, they planted the seeds of their own downfall. Now it's your turn. Have you dealt with corrupt HOAs, city councils, or petty tyrants with clipboards who think rules don't apply to them? Drop your story in the comments below. The best one gets featured next week. Remember this: public records are public. Bond expenditures, LLC registrations, council meeting minutes, it's all there, waiting for someone to look. Corruption hates sunlight, dies in transparency. If you believe small communities deserve big justice, hit that subscribe button. Next story. A teacher who outsmarted a superintendent's embezzlement scheme using FOIA requests and a spreadsheet. You won't believe the ending.
We appreciate you spending your time with us on HOA Stories, where HOA Karens finally get checked. If you enjoyed today's drama, hit like, comment on your favorite part below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be the first to catch our next HOA Showdown.